New decks, new format, new set as always, and this time we're going to be looking at a deck that has been around for a while in Japan because it was released in Paradise Dragona, which was the first part of our Surging Spark set. So Japan have had this card for a while, and in terms of its playability, it's doing decently over in Japan. It's not the best deck, but it is still winning tournaments and doing quite well in tournaments. And that deck is Archaludon EX. 300 HP, stage 1 metal Pokemon with an ability and an attack. And the ability is pretty good and the attack is decent enough. So its ability, Assemble Alloy, says that when you play this Pokemon from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon during your turn, you can search your deck, not your deck, you can attach 2 basic metal energy cards from your discard pile to your metal Pokemon any way you like. And then its attack and Metal Defender does 220 damage for 3 metal energy, and then during your opponent's next turn this Pokemon has no weakness, and its weakness is fire. So this deck seems to be a pretty bare bones and simple kind of deck. You obviously play the pre-evolution, which is, I think it's called Duraludon, and you specifically play the one from Stellar Crown alongside Relicanth from Temporal Forces. The reason why you do that is because Relicanth has the ability that each of your evolved Pokemon can use the attacks from its previous evolution. And Duraludon says that for 2 metal and a colorless, you can do 80 damage plus 10 more damage for each damage counter on this Pokemon. And given that Archaludon EX has 300 HP for a stage 1 Pokemon, that's pretty big, means that you can do a big chunk of revenge damage. So if your Archaludon takes, say, 200 damage, it got Phantom Dived by a Dragapult, that means you can, with Relicanth on the bench, you can use the Duraludon's attack underneath it to do 280 damage since you'll have 20 damage counters, so 80 plus 20 times 10, 280, which is better than its Metal Defender attack, and can knock out V-Star Pokemon. Combine this with other cards such as Starmie from 151, which says that once during your turn you can put 2 damage counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon and then discard this Pokemon and all cards attached to it. So the main game plan of this deck seems to be setting up Archaludon, getting those metal energies into your discard with stuff like Radiant Greninja, Professor's Research, Ultra Ball, Earthen Vessel, all those types of discard cards, and then attacking. That's basically it. You can attack with the Metal Defender attack, do some bit of damage, and get rid of Archaludon's weakness. At the moment in the format we don't really have any fire decks. I suppose Celoredge is one that we'll be seeing play. Gouging Fire sees a little bit of play. You obviously have stuff like Radiant Charizard, which is seen play in stuff like Regidrago and Charizard, any deck that can play a fire energy. So you can remove the 2 times weakness, meaning that you can't get one-shotted by those types of Pokemon if your opponent is looking to, one-shot a Duraludon, especially later on in the game. And then once your Archaludon is attacked, you can then use the Relicanth's ability to use the Archaludon's attack underneath. Not Archaludon, Duraludon's attack underneath. I keep getting confused which is which. You can use the Duraludon's attack underneath to do even more damage than what its base attack is doing for the same amount of energy. On top of that, you can use some other Pokemon such as, Starmie to do that little bit of extra damage, 2 damage counters, so you're doing however much, depending on how much damage you've taken. Some lists are playing Scizor, Revavroom, Hawlucha for a little bit of extra damage. Some earlier versions of the deck were even playing it with Dialga V-Star, which could give you an extra turn with Star Chronos, and Metal Burst did quite a lot of damage depending on how much metal energy was attached to it. Plus with Archaludon you can attach those metal energies onto Dialga V-Star, it doesn't specifically have to be itself. You can also make use of cards such as Professor Turo, meaning that you can pick up your Archaludon that's taken damage and then put it back down, since it does have quite a lot of HP at 300. You could also use Stadium such as Full Metal Lab, which reduces the amount of damage your metal Pokemon take. You can play it alongside some Dusclops maybe, so you can get those little extra bits of damage so that you can hit those one-shots maybe. And then other than that, the deck doesn't really seem to do much else. It just seems to be set up this big HP stage 1 Pokemon, attack, you get attacked, and then you attack back for even more damage, while at the same time removing your weakness with the first attack if you decide to use that one, depending on the matchup obviously. And in terms of its playability in the format, at the moment in Japan, not really doing a whole lot. It's a very low tier deck, mainly because just everything else in the format just does a lot more, and when paired up against Archaludon, can very easily just knock it out and take a win from nowhere. Obviously, bench sniping cards can get rid of the Relicanth, so now you can't use your Duraludon underneath it. You have Pokemon with, you know, large amounts of HP, stage 2 evolutions, even stage 1, like V-Star Pokemon like Lugia and Regidrago, so you're going to take like 2 attacks to knock those out, and they can just one-shot you back, or just do a lot of damage. And even then, sometimes the revenge damage that you deal isn't really enough to knock out, even with those little bits extra. Like Charizard and Dragapult, they can do quite a lot of damage, over 200, and then you're hitting back for almost 300, and then you add on like little bits of chip. It's not going to be enough to knock them out, and then the next turn they can just knock you out. Raging Bolt can just one-hit KO almost anything. So at the moment, the deck isn't seeing a whole lot of play, but it is still something that players should be aware of. It is kind of like a little sleeper deck in Japan, but it all depends on if it's going to do well here, because the Japan meta and our meta is completely different. Like over in Japan, Terapagos isn't even on the tier list. Like Japan's tier list, Terapagos literally isn't there, and over here, Terapagos on Limitless is the 3rd most represented deck. Also over in Japan you have stuff like, you know, Dragapult's doing really well. Over here it's kind of like the 10th best deck on Limitless at the moment. You have obviously all the stuff above it, like Regidrago, Raging Bolt, Charizard. Those are all still really good in Japan. Over here, Gardevoir's like kind of low, but over in Japan, Gardevoir's kind of high. It all just depends. Because you also got to keep in mind is that Japan is a best of 1 format, so their decks are catered towards playing 1 game and then moving on to like the next round. Whereas over here, we're a best of 3, so our decks are catered towards obviously the idea of going first and the idea of going second. But yeah, I can't really think of much else to say about Archaludon. But over in Japan, the deck is decent. It's not the best, but post-rotation, it could be something pretty good, depending on what other types of metal Pokemon we see or metal support we get in future sets. I'd like to thank you all for watching. Let me know in the comments your thoughts about Archaludon. Will you be playing it? Do you think it doesn't really have its potential in our format? Or do you think it's something that people will be sleeping on and could potentially, you know, rise up to be a really good deck? Make sure to like, comment and subscribe, all of that nonsense, and I'll see you in the next video, whatever that may be. Take care.